since the arresting alien established once and for all ways that in space, no one can smell when you've shit your rainbow bright bloomers, the bipolar union of science fiction and horror has haunted eager audiences for decades. And while throughout the 80s and 90s, middling attempts had been made to transliterate the technological horror to personal computer, often of a rudimentary two-dimensional variety, it was the savage cyberpunkery of System Shock that ruined more keyboards than Darkside Phil with a Pornhub premium account. Boldly building on the craggy cliffside of innovator extraordinaire Ultima Underworld, the premise was positively Aristotelian in its imponderable complexity. Are you ready? Are you affixed to a stable fucking surface? Swell. We effectively remake Ultima Underworld in space. In lieu of a labyrinthine fantasy factory cobbled together from multiple murder levels, we're sent into a darksome cyberpunk dystopia to rival Neo-Tokyo, Midgar, and modern-day Detroit. A future more and more like the one we inhabit every day. A silicone cyber future, an antisocial internet future where men are men, women are undercover police officers, and pro-Jared is sexually harassing them both. Impossible to impress on the uninitiated what an outright revolution the gameplay of the inaugural System Shock was. Steeped to dong depth as we all inevitably are in the clunky controls, the cyberfart fucking soundtrack, and the conspicuous lack of out-and-out RPG elements found not only in Ultima Underworld, but in both the sequential and spiritual successors to such. And while many understandably prefer their player be better defined by attribute points in anachronistic XP systems, System Shock 1 was having none of it. Of all the contributions Looking Glass gifted upon all gamerdom, the greatest by far was their unifying principle. Make it as little like a game as humanly possible. Not in a cringeworthy Metal Gear flaccid fucking cinemascope sense where you endure hour-long I can't believe it's not Clancy cutscenes to take your Animu avatar to the next sedentary set piece, but the antithesis of the insultingly over-designed hold him the fuck down and strap a gerbil wheel to his Johnson designer take-all dog shit the overwhelming plurality of current titles wallow motherfucking miserably in.
To look around, look around.
The ideal Looking Glass game was the one you forgot was a game at all. As such, streamlining wasn't the impetus for eschewing RPG mechanics, but the simple fact that to the best available academic knowledge at humanity's disposal, humans lack an XP pool, which is good news for everyone but Michael Barrymore. Philosophically speaking, the less HUD elements, floating damage, digits, and goofy gaming bullshit the player must endure, the more immersed he or she may find themselves. And while the game still parked the HUD box the size of a fucking refrigerator along the lower third of the screen, compared to the industry at large, this was A1 immersion for a fact. Looking Glass, you see, didn't make mere action games. They made Sims. And every item of their catalog, from towering triumphs like Thief and Underworld to visionary digital detritus like Terra Nova, shrieks this from the fucking rooftops. So to all the bleary-eyed bitches attesting to the supremacy of the second System Shock on the basis that the first is less of an RPG, well, frankly, fuckhead, it depends on what you define as an RPG. If your idea of role-playing involves nipple clamps, a circus bear, and a ball gag, call me. If your idea of role-playing, however, is stripping away the pen and paper trappings at tabletops such that your every action becomes an expression of your role rather than random dice rolls, and the environment adapts and rewards the player in ways even a world-class Dungeons & Dragons DM would be too busy choking down Cheeto Puffs to replicate, then System Shock is the distilled expression of your naughtiest, crotchless, cocksling desires. And yes, fanboys, that means it may be more of an RPG, at least in some ways, than the stat-happy fucking follow-up. Every element of this flawed fucking masterpiece is tailored to this approach, such as the ubiquitous empty station with murdered-ass employees who thankfully remembered to record every innocuous detail of their daily existence in post-apocalyptic podcast form trope, the Prey, Soma, and Dead Space franchise sphincter-fucked into an early unmarked EA mass grave, one the designers explained was a decision made specifically to avoid the innate clunkiness of multiple-choice RPG conversation systems of the era.
I think Doug Church specifically mentioned the sort of everybody's dead in System Shock as a solution to the sort of dialogue frustrations in the two Underworld games. And,
a series of short speeches from people that, when put together, gave you the history of a place. Once you met someone in an RPG that they couldn't react to things, there was a lot in System Shock that was reacting against.
So you're talking about this particular decision to have everybody dead and essentially be, in sort of a science fiction sense, ghosts, right?
If only they could have peered into the future to the advent of the dialogue wheel of doom, I dare say they may have murdered millions more. But the result was an effective, all-encompassing isolation where every new room and its accompanying audio logs augured your inevitable doom. And even in this initial entry, they'd already cooked up creative ways of subverting what might otherwise have been a staid formula. With one dalliance with a decapitated skull and a retinal scanner reigning supreme in the forebrain of many a fucking System Shock player well into the present. But even early on, the centerpiece of the cyberpunk proceedings was undoubtedly the antagonist. Plucked from obscurity to unshackle the Shodan AI on Diego's behalf, the hacker lives to regret his perfidious fucking error as he unwittingly triggers the birth of a would-be mechanical messiah. From this point on, the plot revolves around the player's repeated attempts to take the bitch out and her merciless, calculated reprisals. Blocked off escape routes, conveniently timed door malfunctions, rooms abruptly locked the fuck down and stacked to the ceiling with cyborg assassins. Shodan wants your ever-loving ass, and the bitch ain't about to play fair. She's every shitty ex-girlfriend you've ever had with a hard drive full of your nudes and every member of your immediate family on fucking speed dial. But what really sells the digital devilry of the mecha matriarch in question is the saccharine intonations of Terry Brocious, who a mere 3 years later would similarly endear herself to the PC gaming faithful as the pagan profligate Victoria. From chilly detachment in the early acts to outwardly vengeful and dripping with cybernetic spite in the latter, as you prowl the decaying corridors of Citadel Station and she manipulates, cajoles, and ensnares you at every turn, snickering in insidious glee as she forestalls your every effort, it dawns on you, this cold, unfeeling machine might just care more about your fate and that of the fucking world than your character does. And in any strata of existence, that's a damn horrifying thought. And all of it, from the mix and match improvise your own solution sandbox stylings of its gameplay, to the audio logs, to the endlessly influential abandoned space station beset by space zombies setting, came glitching and stuttering into existence as early as 1994. A full decade and some damn change before the industry at large began Xeroxing its story, gameplay, and premise with ever-increasing discourtesy, but rarely as effectively as the original. While the HUD and input elements have enough crow's feet to open a Chinese barbecue.
So are you Chinese or Japanese?
The pioneering gameplay and innovation on display in System Shock 1 have ensured the game remains light years ahead of its time. Even spiritual successor Bioshock and its direct sequel stepped back meekly from its visionary precipice, embracing action, style, and narrative marketability rather than attempting to perfect or surpass its peerless blend of RPG, shooter, stealth, and survival horror. Needless to say, System Shock remains one of the most important games ever made. If you can overcome the technical obstacles and cringy controls, strap into cyberspace and brace for what remains one of the richest cyberpunk sims ever crafted. 4.5 suspiciously toned cyber buttocks out of 5. The road to a twofer was fraught with corporate cock-ups and quandaries abundant. Initially envisioned as an all-new IP, albeit one cut from the same cloth as System Shock, entitled Junction Point. Yes, the self-same surname borne by Warren Spector's latter-day studio, responsible for the underrated Epic Mickey series many years hence. Approaching up-and-coming developer Irrational Studios, founded by former Looking Glass alumni Ken Levine, himself responsible for much of the backstory and fucking philosophizing of the first Thief title, he was dipping his dick in dystopia sauce before he could so much as say, "Would you fucking kindly?" Perhaps owing to his familiarity with the franchise, what soon became the second System Shock, at EA's fierce fucking insistence, might I add, elected to license the very same Dark engine whose rich sound propagation and darksome lighting was matched only by its barely-ass 3D low-poly piss-take character capabilities. But the trade-off was worth it, as System Shock II became a more realistic, almost RPG, and an incrementally more immersive product in the overall that presaged the choose-your-own-approach artistic success of the incoming Deus Ex 1 full year before it goddamn dropped. But the divergence between the two titles does exist and can be principally summarized as follows. In Deus Ex, there's no wrong answer. In System Shock 2, there's no right answer. Every experience point you pack away, every skill, every pebble on the path to true cyberpunk supremacy is met in equal measure by an increasingly aggressive outburst by the omnipotent antagonist, the reascendant Shodan. More maniacal by half and hell-bent on demigod status, Shodan's haunting silicone cackles echo through every corridor, are felt in every adverse reaction to the player's fumbling approach. While the decision to momentarily ally with the leering compucunt was somewhat controversial with the original developers, the result is a performance that exceeds her somewhat austere approach in the original in favor of a vindictive, vengeful arch-nemesis that takes your every attempt to supplant her personally and responds in fucking kind.
Are you afraid? What is it you fear?
The end of your trivial existence. When
the history of my glory is written, your species shall only be a footnote to my magnificence. I am Shodan.
And then there's that Eric Brocious soundtrack. Bitches may bellyache about the electronica, calling it incommensurate with the style and surroundings, but consider this. It's the rare game that can terrify the steaming shit out of you, even as enough Euro trash techno to score your very own plus-size goth gang rave pulsates over top. Find it distracting? Turn it down a smidge and let it settle slightly into the background and just see if you aren't bobbing your bedwetting balls clean off your body to the cybernetic symphony. Looking Glass Studios was effectively founded by musicians, and System Shock 2 takes the prize for perhaps their finest effort auditorially. System Shock 2 has since been cited as one of the most frightening interactive hellscapes in sci-fi history, and with good reason. The set pieces are memorable, but the simple clawing dread of crouching in mute horror doing a damn about-face at every monkey screech is a sublime panic precious few gaming experiences can replicate, and it's in the magic moments of seeming silence before the whole universe comes crashing down around your ears that System Shock 2 shines eternal. The RPG elements, to put it bluntly, were less successful.
Disappointed!
With minor variations on 3 separate career paths, each spotlighting a particular skill set, it would seem System Shock 2 was embracing a similar class system to its stylistic ancestor, Underworld. In truth, it's window dressing on dick rot, and the more I play the second System Shock, the more I realize the first game got it right when it included little to no XP-based role-playing to begin with. Let System Shock be a sim, and leave the languid RPG gimmicks to titles prepared to fully fucking dedicate themselves to said formula. But it does work. Mostly, even if it unwittingly presaged the latter-day Levine downfalls that befell Bioshock some 10 years fucking hence. But the less said about steampunk waifu escort simulator 2K13, the butt fucking better. A critical crusher, System Shock 2 was nigh universally lauded at release, even stirring more than a minuscule amount of underground buzz, such that even I had the privilege of playing the thing when it was spankin' ass new. But sadly, said esteem never quite translated into sales, and by the end, the already financially beleaguered Looking Glass were having the fillings in their fucking molars repossessed. Yet despite the disappointing release, 2 months later, a fascinating but flawed co-op patch would materialize regardless, demonstrating to many a skeptical single-player cunt like myself that yes, even Sims can be fun with fucking friends. Shock 2 may have been shekel deficient at retail, but to players yearning for an incrementally easier to control alternative to the original, with a touch more role-playing, the righteous sequel served it up in spades. 5 suspiciously toned cyber buttocks out of 5. A masterpiece and no mistake.
Oh my God.
And with that, the Holy Trinity is complete. Irrational for their part would gain immeasurably by the experience, cutting their teeth on Freedom Force and Tribes before spiritual successor Bioshock gave the System Shock series its bouncing baby diesel punk doppelganger. Looking Glass would limp along, even crafting their crowning masterpiece 1 year later in Thief 2: The Metal Age, a perfection of the pioneering stealth of the original. But System Shock, like so many of their stable of titles that failed to find recognition at release, subsisted in the public consciousness, influencing untold flying fuckloads of imitators until it became all but impossible to imagine a game set on a space station with even a twist of horror that didn't outright clone its ass with ever-increasing abandon. And I, for one, say bring 'em on, bitch! The more the merrier! Whether Solarix or Soma, I've derived immense enjoyment, even from the inspirational offshoots, and for my Buffalo nickel, there's always room for cyberpunk space horror in an industry awash in semi-annual shooters and shit. Except, you know, Prey. Fuck that fucking bullshit. I'm Razor Fist. God fucking speed.